Kitchen knives are probably the most used tool in a home. They're used during virtually every meal prep of the day. And if I had $1 for every house that I've been at over the years where I've seen someone try to prepare a meal and all they had was dull knives, I'd have a lot of money. Okay? It does not have to be that way. There is an easy way to sharpen a knife and an easy way to maintain a knife so that you will never have to cut with a dull knife ever again. And I'm going to teach you that method. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about kitchen knives. And the kitchen knives and the sharpening that I'm going to teach you applies to Western style cook's knives, French, European style. Okay, if you have Japanese style knives, they require different stones, they require a different technique, they require a finer edge because of what they will be used for. If you watch a lot of the videos of guys sharpening knives on YouTube, you'll see a lot of Japanese and Chinese, but particularly Japanese chefs, and they're sharpening with stones that range from 1,000 grit all the way to 8,000 grit, and sometimes beyond that. Okay, you don't have to have that fine of a grit to work in the average American kitchen, whether we're talking your home kitchen or a professional setting. It's not necessary. You don't need 8,000 grit to chop potatoes and onions and tomatoes and carrots and all of that kind of deal. You don't need that fine of an edge. Okay, you need a very sharp edge. But these guys that are using these Japanese chefs that are using the Japanese knives, they're doing things like sushi, where they're cutting raw fish to really, really wafer thin, like you can see through them slices, okay? And they need that fine edge for that. But for the home cook or the average restaurant, it's not needed. While we're at it, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of knives you need in your kitchen. Now, you can go out and you can buy like a 6-piece kitchen knife kit, or a 10-piece or an 11-piece with the butcher block holder and all of that. Okay, if you've already got that, I'm not telling you to throw it all out. Okay, but you don't need but 2 knives in a kitchen. A third you need if you cut a lot of bread. Okay, and that would be a 10-inch or 9-inch long serrated edge knife. It doesn't matter whether it says bread knife on it or not. If you've got a fairly long serrated edge, then you would take that and use that knife just for bread. While we're on the subject of serrated knives, the knife that you cut your vegetables and your meats and stuff with does not need to be serrated. As a matter of fact, I would caution against serrated knives. Serrated knives cannot be easily sharpened. I know that there are chefs that will sharpen one side of the flattest side of their serrated knives like they would a regular knife, and that's not how you sharpen a serrated edge. Okay, but they're not easily sharpened. But there is also a problem with the fact that if you're like me and you're a left-handed cutter, okay, the serrated edge knives, if I use them in my left hand, because they're basically designed for a right-hander, what I'm going to end up with is a cut that wanders, a cut that goes like this and not straight, okay? So for lefties like me, they're a pain in the rear end, but also manufacturers use serrated edge knives because they don't have to have decent steel. They don't have to have a hardenable steel or anything like that, because the way a serrated knife works is that the serrations give it pointed teeth. Have you ever went to cut a tomato? And you know how if your knife is dull on a tomato, it'll push down on the skin, but it won't really cut through that skin. But you can turn that knife up on its tip and stab the tomato and then slice it, and it'll slice just fine. And it looks like the knife's sharp, but it's not really. You just started to cut with the tip of that blade and then sliced. Well, that's exactly what serrated edges do. They're not really as sharp as you think they are. They will cut you, and they will cut you deep, but it's because of the way the serrations are designed that you get that cut, and not actually because the knife is truly sharp. Okay, now there is one big company I know of. I'm not mentioning their name, but most people, if you've looked at chef knives and stuff like that, you've probably considered them for your home. Okay, and they are big on serrated edges. Okay, matter of fact, you have to send them back to them to get them sharpened when they do go dull. Okay, and they will do that for free, but you're not getting any kind of money's worth when you buy those knives. They're, in my opinion, they're sucky knives that just aren't any good. And yes, I've had them in my hands and looked at them. There's a whole set of them at a local store that I've held in my hands, and I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for a single one of those knives. That's a personal opinion, but it's backed up by my understanding of knives and what I see and know as a good knife as opposed to something that I would not call a good knife. So stay away from serrations unless you're cutting bread. Or if you got steak knives or something. We're not talking about that. We're talking about kitchen knives that you're going to use to prepare a meal. You're better off with a straight, plain-edged blade that you know how to sharpen. How do you do that? How do you sharpen your knives and keep them sharp? Now we're going to go outside to my bench, and we're going to talk about the techniques used to sharpen your knife and how to keep it sharp so that you never have to cut with a dull knife in your kitchen ever again. Alright, this is a stone holder. They're cheap. You can get them on Amazon for $15 or $20. I have it because I use a lot of different stones in knife sharpening. You don't have to have this. You can put your knife on your stone that you're going to use to sharpen your knife with, which you do have to have, on a folded towel or flat down on a counter if it's thick enough, that kind of deal. So let's talk about a stone. If you watch the chef videos, particularly like the Japanese knives, the sushi chefs and all of that, most people that are teaching you to sharpen cooking knives are using very fine stones. They're using, a lot of them are using water stones that range from 1,000 to 8,000 grit. You don't need that. The sushi chefs are using those really, really fine grits of stone because they're cutting really super thin slices of fish that are so thin you could see through them like rice paper. Okay, in the average cook's kitchen, the homeowner, you don't need that much. What I have here, this is a Norton India oil stone. This is a Norton, I believe it's it's a IB8. That stands for India Bench Stone 8-inch. This is 1 inch by 2 inch. It's 1 inch thick by 2 inches wide by 8 inches long. It's a combination stone. It comes with and the stone's a little dirty because I was sharpening on it earlier. It comes with a coarse side, which is about 140 grit, and a fine side, which is 400 grit. You should never need this side of the stone. Unless your knife has big gouges and chips out of the edge, you don't need that. All you need is this 400 grit stone. This stone has been used for decades by a huge number of cooks professional and amateur to sharpen their knives with and work in a kitchen. You don't need anything finer than this, unless, like I said, you're doing the aforementioned sushi and things like that. Now, if you want a finer edge, then go ahead and do that. I don't have anything against it, but you don't need it. And this stone will cost you $26 and so many odd cents on Amazon all day long, and it's a lifetime stone. You'll never have to buy one again if you maintain it. And what I'm going to use, this is meant to be used with an oil, but I use a mixture of like a drop or two of dish soap and water, and it works just fine. And we're gonna look at the chef's knife. Now, just so we understand, this knife does not cut. Okay? Hopefully you saw that. Now what I'm going to do, put a little bit of dish soap on that stone. And in order to find the angle, Western knives are sharpened at a 22-degree angle, 20-degree angle, 25-degree angle. Depends on the person. Finding that angle is just as easy as that's 90 degrees. That's 45 degrees, and half of that is about 22 and a half. Now, I have sharpened for so long that I don't need that. But you can find that edge. You can lay a knife on the edge of a stone and lay it until you find where the bevel lies best. This one you can't, because whoever had this knife before me basically rounded the bevel. So I'm going to start fresh. But you just place the knife like this at the angle you want it. And you're not using a whole lot of pressure whatsoever. But you're pulling that along, and when you get to where this tip starts to round, you want to lift. You don't want to swoop it like this. You want to take it and just lift your guiding hand up a bit till you see that edge follow onto that stone. And so we're just gonna, what you're gonna do, you're not going back and forth right now. You're gonna stay on this side of this knife blade. You're gonna pull that forward. Let the stone cut. You don't need a lot of pressure. You just want enough pressure to hold the stone even, hold the knife rather, even on the stone. Get this whole section. But you want to use just enough pressure to keep the knife on the stone without it skipping across the stone. What you're doing is you're going to continue in this fashion on this side of the knife until you can run your finger on this side of the side that's facing you, and find that you have a burr off the edge of that knife all the way from the tip to the heel. So we're going to continue, and don't worry about how long it takes you. Each knife will be different. Just take your time and make sure that you get that burr along the entire length of the edge of that blade. And I have fast forwarded the video a little bit at a time because it may take a long time or short time to do this, and I don't want an hour-long video. If you start getting black streaks and marks on your stone, do what I just did. Rub that in. If you look, I don't have a cloth, but you see how clean that stone came? So, and I have a burr all the way here. It started at the tip. And we want to continue until we have a burr all the way along this edge. And this knife was actually a candidate for that other side of this stone, because somebody really rounded off the bevel on this edge. Like I said, there's no number of passes, set number of passes to do. You just pass the edge across the stone until you get that burr along the entire length of this nice edge. Once that's done, on this side, we'll be back. We have, if you take your finger and do this, you can feel a burr along the entire edge. You can feel it with your thumb along the entire edge of this side of the knife. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to sharpen on that side. And what I want to do is roll that burr over to the other side. Nice and slow and easy. Take your time, because the key to sharpening is to maintain the exact same angle on an edge every time you pass it across that stone. And notice I'm coming across and I'm lifting the support hand, the hand the knife is in, up along that burr, or along the edge of that. As this knife curves, as the blade curves, I'm lifting it up so that it goes and lays along the edge of that edge of that knife is laying on the stone and passing across of it. That way what I'll end up is an even bevel along the edge of the knife, instead of having a big fat bevel over here and a skinny one down there. Once again, we'll clean the stone. Now I tend to go, not to go like this, but I tend to, see how straight this edge is? I tend to go up like that a little bit and then do that, because I want this be nice and straight. Let's look at that bevel. And there's a burr all along the edge of that knife. So now what I'm going to do, now the goal is to take this knife and do alternating strokes. And what we're going to do, or what we're attempting to do, what our goal is by passing this edge across this stone in alternating strokes, we're taking that burr that's on the edge of this bevel, and we're doing this number with it. We're moving it to this side, and then to that side, and this side, and then to that side. And what our goal is have you ever taken a coat hanger or another piece of wire, any other piece of wire, and done this number until it got really hot and broke in half? What we're trying to do is we're trying to make this burr break off of this, the edge of this blade, and what that'll do is it will leave the very apex of this edge, the very, very finest, the true cutting portion of this edge will be absolutely perfect. It will meet together perfectly like that. And that's what you want, with the finest possible edge that you can. Now sometimes what you can do is you can watch the stone very carefully, and you can see sometimes that burr laying on the stone. And sometimes not. But what you're doing is you're just passing that over. And then you want to kind of feel, don't run it that way, the edge of this blade, see if you can find a burr. And you're using, okay, see, there's part of the burr. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's peeling off the knife. That's what we want. And you want to use very light passes now, because what you don't want to do is grind more steel on this bevel and create more burr. What you're trying to do now is move that burr from one side to the other, and I'm seeing little pieces of that burr all over the stone. Alright, we're back. What I'm going to do, I didn't bring a cloth out with me to wipe this blade, so what I'm going to do, I would not advise you to do this. You could cut yourself really bad doing that. Now, and I'm going to take this and do what I did earlier. I'm going to rub this stone clean. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that same piece of paper remember, it wouldn't cut anything, right? That's all the edge you'll ever need in a standard American household kitchen for chopping tomatoes, vegetables. That serrated knife talk that we had earlier, a lot of people use a serrated knife on a tomato because the tomato skin is very, very hard to cut if your knife is not sharp. This knife will slice through a tomato perfectly fine, like butter. That's all it takes. That's a method anybody can learn and use. Now, What about maintaining, and I'll sharpen this the exact same way. Now what about maintaining that edge? Well, a couple of things. You need what's known as a sharpening steel. Now that's a misnomer, or it's misnamed. A steel does not sharpen a knife. Now a sharpening steel is, you know how you watch the chefs and they have that rod that has steel rod or ceramic rod, has a handle on it, and you'll see them do this number and pass the blade across that steel. Okay, what they're doing, when you cut with a knife, what happens is the edge doesn't get dull as fast as we think it does, but the edge of that knife is straight. You've put a very fine, straight edge on this blade. But when you start to cut things, what happens is that edge does this number. It starts going out of straight, so that you end up not with this kind of a profile on the edge of your blade, but more like that. And what that steel does is when you pass this knife along the edge, along that steel, it straightens it back out. And what that does is it allows the edge that you put on that knife to cut well again, because it's straight again. It's not all wavy and twisted up, okay? Now you can maintain a knife for 3 months, 6 months, whatnot, depending on your blade and what the steel quality is and all of that, by simply every time you go to use the knife to prepare a meal, you pass it 10 or 12 times across that steel and then cut with it. And when you go to use it again for the next meal, you do the same thing. If you pass it across that steel every time, your edge will last a long time. And then once it stops cutting the way that you want it to, go back to the stone and do exactly what I just did. And the knife will be sharp again. And the more you do that, the faster you'll get at it. It took me longer than what you see on video because I edited so that it doesn't take forever and people won't watch the video. It'll probably be too long anyway, and half the people that say they watch it only watch like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Hey, I appreciate your view no matter how long it is. Thank you. But anyway, one other comment. You should never cut with your knife on anything but wood, bamboo, or plastic, or the polycarbonate plastic type boards, okay, that people use for raw meat. I have a wooden cutting board. I prefer wood, but if I'm cutting raw meat, I'm cutting on a polycarbonate or plastic board. I don't want raw wood on my wooden, or raw meat on my wooden cutting board, because I don't want that seeping down into that wood where I can't get it out and contaminating everything I put on that wooden board. If you want just one board, get a polycarbonate board. But the sensation of cutting with a fine edge on wood is second to none, and so I have a wooden cutting board. Also, never use a glass cutting board. I know it's popular in a lot of people's kitchens, but you can spend the time that I just spent on this knife edge to get it where it is right now, and 2 cuts on a glass cutting board or a china plate or a metal or stone counter, and that edge is gone. It's destroyed, and you're going to have to go back to a stone. The steel won't bring it back. So don't cut on anything but wood or the plastic polycarbonate type cutting boards, or the rubber mat cutting boards, the flexible rubber mat cutting boards. You can cut on them too. Don't cut on steel, metal. Don't cut on glass. Don't cut on china. Don't cut in your tin cookie sheet. Don't do that. Respect the edge, the time, and the effort you took to put an edge on this blade. Respect it. Okay? But you can learn to sharpen your kitchen knives. You can have a sharp knife all the time. Okay? It's easy. I'll talk to you later.